18 months ago, K&L Gates, a global firm with a strong US presence, merged with Australian firm then known as Middleton's. And joining me today is Peter Kalis, who's the Chairman and Global Managing Partner, and Nick Nichola, who's the Managing Partner Australia, to talk about the relationship between the US and Australia, the global economy, and of course the market for legal services. Peter and Nick, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Kate.
Nick, if I start with you, if we look first to the relationship between Australia and the US and apply a bit of a health check, how would you describe the current ties between the two countries?
Kate, I think the ties between our two countries are exceptionally close, and they've been close for a long, long time. I mean, if you look at the key statistics, America still is, the US is still the largest investor here in Australia. I think Australia, I'm not quite sure about this, but I think Australia is probably the 5th largest investor back into the US. Politically, we're very closely aligned. Economically, in June, our Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, had discussions with President Obama. We're involved in security measures in the Asia-Pacific region. I think the closeness of the countries and the ties have never really been stronger.
And Peter, do you think this is something that's likely to continue?
I do. There's a very strong foundation. There's shared values. There's shared aspirations for the world. And speaking only as a U.S. citizen, and obviously not in a position of an official position in the government, it's really great having a friend in the world like Australia.
And what about if we look then to the newly merged firm? It's 18 months down the track now, so not newly merged. How would you describe the relationship?
Well, it's very interesting. I describe it as almost unnaturally close. And I know that sounds a little promotional, but it's true. It is the case that K&L Gates and Middleton's had very much in common an ethos of punching above their weight class. You know, these were firms to which nothing was handed, and they went out and earned it every day. They still do, but they do it under the same banner now. So the cultural ties are very, very close. When the cultural ties are close and people feel simpatico across time zones, a lot of the rest of it falls in place. There's a great sharing of work and client relationships and client collaborations, a lot of joint initiatives, and of course, below the hood of the car in the engine, all of the operational, technological, financial integration, HR integration has been proceeding at a pace. So we feel very positively 18 months in. It's really been an extraordinary start.
And Nick, what about for you? Have there been any, challenges or surprises along the way?
There's always challenges, Kate, as you know, but those challenges, I think, largely were anticipated and are more on the integration implementation side. On the people side, I have to say, it's worked out exceptionally well. And just echoing what Pete said, I think we're with a bunch of people that are like-minded, that like each other, and God forbid we should like each other when we work together, but we do, and that's being translated all through the various sort of stratas of the organisation. So it's not just at the lawyer level, which, being a law firm, we tend to focus on the lawyers. It's at all levels of the organisation. It's been terrific.
I'd like to look, at the market for legal services. How would you describe the current market for legal services globally, and both in the Asia-Pacific region as well? Nick, I'll ask you.
I think it's accepted wisdom at the moment. Certainly in my lifetime, Kate, this has been the most competitive market that I've ever experienced. It's a highly sophisticated market. The clients are highly sophisticated. They know what they want. And they have a plethora of choice now in terms of providers of legal services. So it's an exceptionally competitive environment. It always has been, but there is now an increasing focus on that. The legal media and even just the normal media report on it pretty much on a daily basis. But we're up for the challenge, and it's an exciting time to be a lawyer.
Would you say that for being a lawyer, it's a little bit like being a management consultant at this point in time?
I'm not sure that I would necessarily use that analogy. I mean, if what you mean by that, Kate, is that that in a sense we are perhaps viewed by clients as being trusted advisors, being required to not only have an exceptionally good grasp of the legal issues, but also being forever and always mindful of commercial issues and being able to assist our clients in making commercial decisions, then yes, I would agree with the analogy, because that is in fact what the life of a lawyer now is nowadays.
And Peter, Nick mentioned obviously that it's quite a challenging environment. We're seeing the emergence of a lot of new law models, alternative billing and secondment style models. Do you see this as a challenge to the K&L Gates? I guess it's more the traditional big law model?
Not really. I mean, I'd like to say yes, because a lot of consultants and so on spill a lot of ink on this subject that suggests that it's a strategic challenge. It really isn't. When you look at K&L Gates and how we're positioned with the multiplicity of disciplines and jurisdictions, the global positioning, within a nation, the national positioning, key industry sectors, and so on, you would see that we have a continual inflow of highly complex engagements from clients arising from forces like globalization, the regulation of private markets by governments around the world, oftentimes in quite inconsistent ways, by the challenges of innovation, the creation and protection of intellectual property. And when I look at the alternative providers who purportedly compose this phenomenon called new law, they're capable of doing absolutely none of that. No client in its right mind that owes duties to shareholders and others would repose those sort of engagements in something called new law. They simply wouldn't. Now, do those organizations accept some commoditized type engagements that used to be done by what is now called big law? Of course, but that's always been the case. There's always been a process of commoditization and migration of work to more efficient destinations. But at the same time, more complex work comes in at the top, and that's what we're positioned for.
It must be difficult, I guess, from a management perspective, managing a global workforce. How do you do it, and what's your advice for others?
Well, I don't do it alone. That's the principal advice, and that's the reality. We are in 17 nations. We're in on 5 continents. And there really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to HR. We have to be adaptive to local mores, local traditions, obviously local legal and regulatory requirements, and but at the same time, we have an overarching principle that we're no better and we're no worse than the people who compose us. So we have to have this unerring focus on our people. And here in Australia, but elsewhere throughout our platform, we have extraordinarily capable people in human relations functions that keep us at the cutting edge, and that's where we want to be.
Yeah. Nick, I wanted to get your view on the economy, both globally and I guess also here in the Asia Pacific.
Gee, that's a fairly wide question, isn't it, Kate? I think it's probably well accepted that 2008 was a bit of a watershed moment in all of our lives around the world. I'm not sure that I'm prepared to say that the global financial crisis is dead and buried and we've moved on from that. I think the remnants, we're still feeling those consequences. And I think that's the case globally. I mean, different economies are responding in different ways to that. I personally believe that our region, in particular Australia, but also our region, is well placed. Yes, it has its challenges and will continue to have challenges for some time to come, but I actually am reasonably confident, not quite bullish, but reasonably confident about the economic outlook for Australia in particular and the Asia Pacific region. That's my view. I don't have any scientific basis for that, but that's the sense that I get. There's a lot in the media which sometimes I wonder whether they're headlines designed to sell papers as opposed to a rigorous analysis of all of the underlying issues. But look, I think we are well placed in this part of the world to continue to do well.
Peter, what about the US? K&L Gates has a very strong stance about not carrying debt and being very transparent with its financials. What's your feeling on the current debt situation in the United States?
I think it's terrible. I really do. We have an economy of about $17 trillion in GDP, but we also have sovereign debt at the federal level of about the same amount. That actually understates the burden because we also, in the realm of sovereign debt, we have debt at the state level and we have debt at municipal levels. We are saved by the fact, I think, that the dollar, the US dollar, is the reserve currency in the world, and that the US economy is viewed as sort of a bedrock economy. And in troubled times, of which we have no shortage now in this world, the US is viewed as somewhat of a refuge for investment dollars that might otherwise go elsewhere. But you're right, we are at K&L Gates, in our tiny little part of the world, we are debt adverse. There is, in fairness to all of the politicians, although being fair to them sometimes is a stretch, there is a difference between a law firm and a sovereign country. With law firms, and why we feel so strongly about a no debt position is, our assets are not patents, they're not factories. They go down the elevator every day, the lift every day. They're going to come back the next day up somebody's elevator, but we don't know whether it'll be ours. That's the nature of the current market for legal talent. It migrates, it's mobile. And overlaying that situation with substantial term bank debt has always seemed to us to be putting the organization at risk. Because essentially you have to be able to predict both future revenues to tend to that debt, which is hard enough, but also future volcanic events, what the literature calls black swan events, which by definition are unpredictable, and the GFC is a great example. So we're not smart enough to make those predictions, so we stay out of debt. With countries, they have a benefit. The United States has a printing press in the basement where it can just churn out dollars, and they don't have to worry about their assets leaving, So there is a major difference, but I just want to be honest with you. I find the whole debt situation in the United States repulsive.
Well, Nick, we're hearing a lot of talk also in Australia about our current debt situation and tough budgets. Do you think we're on track to solve that?
I'm not sure that I can say necessarily that we're on track. I think what the current federal government is trying to do is probably on the right track. I think certainly business accepts that we can't continue living beyond our means and that there needs to be some measures, tough as they may be, that will eventually return us back to from a deficit to a surplus. But I tend to think that maybe even the general community has that understanding and probably has that acceptance as well. I think the issue is that there's a lot of debate quite properly and quite appropriately about where those cuts should be. So that's really the difficulty. It's finding that right balance. I think the business community and the community at large probably accepts that there does need to be some tough measures, but the question is, where do you make those cuts? And given that there will be elements of society that will be somewhat disadvantaged, where should that burden fall overall? That, I think, is the legitimate debate. And of course we have a situation here, Kate, as you well know, where the budget hasn't been passed as yet.
I guess I'd like to change tact for a while. I've just got one or two questions left and look at some of the initiatives that that K&L Gates is part of. Nick, K&L Gates was the first signatory to the Tristan Jepson Memorial Foundation.
Yes.
Psychological wellbeing best practice guidelines for the legal profession, which is obviously a world first in setting a framework for creating healthy workplaces. How important was it for you and for K&L Gates to become a signatory and try to work towards a healthy workplace?
Oh, Kate, look, for us that was tremendously important. You'd be well aware that of all the professions, the legal profession ranks extreme, depending on how you view it, it ranks very, very low on the score of an environment where people do get anxious, where there is a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety and stress-related illnesses, and we have had, as you know, unfortunately, several cases of suicide as well in our profession in this country, and for a whole host of reasons, we don't have time to go into those in this conversation, we don't fare very well as a profession in dealing with those sorts of situations. And all of the research demonstrates that. So for us, we are a people business. So our assets, as Pete mentioned a moment ago, I mean, I don't like talking about them as assets, but it's the people. It's what makes our organisation, what makes any professional services firm and law firms. So for us, we spend a lot of time thinking, worrying, strategising about how we create the best environment for our people that minimise these concerns and these risks. And these guidelines that you referred to, they are just guidelines, so they're not prescriptive, but I think they're a great, it's a great initiative. It's something that we can strive to work towards as we continue to try to build a culture in the workplace that is supportive of all of our people as much as possible.
Yeah, certainly. Another great initiative is the Global Day of Service that K&L Gates has started. What, I guess, inspired firstly the idea, and what's been the buy-in from the global leadership and staff alike?
Well, this is a really extraordinary development that the senior management of the firm can claim no credit for. We composed some time ago something we call the GALC is the acronym, the Global Associate Liaison Committee. And this is a group of about 15 associate lawyers from around the world, 2 or 3 here from Australia, by the way, who meet with our executive committee twice a year, where the agenda is dictated by the associates and the ambitions are to make us a better law firm. Organizational transformation, and on the assumption that maybe Nick and I are about 30 years too old to have an imaginative idea. And this is actually borne out in experience, because this was the Global Associate Liaison Committee that came up with the idea that we have over 4,000 personnel around the world. Wouldn't it be great if we all came together one day a year, got out of the office together, lawyers and staff alike, and committed ourselves to the betterment of our communities, feeding the hungry in our communities, otherwise serving our communities, and that's exactly the way it worked out. I'm really proud to say that the flagship legal publication in the U.S., which is called The American Lawyer, confers global awards every year, and we, because of this initiative, received the designation as the top corporate social responsibility initiative in the global legal industry. And again, Nick and I had nothing to do with authoring this. It was a bunch of our fine young lawyers that came up with it, and actually who ran with the implementation of it as well.
That's right.
They did just an extraordinary job. In the first year, we had a couple thousand people around the world out of the office for the day, at full compensation, of course, and so on, trying to make their communities better. We're terribly proud about it.
Yeah, you should be. Well, it's been great to catch up with you both again and to get your perspectives on US, the global economy, and of course the legal market. So Peter Kalis and Nick Nichola, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.